Thank you for tuning in to our web-based extended conversation on sage-grouse habitat. So obviously you've looked at the program and decided to rejoin us. By way of courtesy, let us reintroduce our guest, Steve Madsen, wildlife biologist for the Utah State Office at the BLM. John Andrews, who's the Associate Director of the School Institutional Trust Land, SITLA, here in Utah. Verlin Smith, who is the Branch Chief of Renewable Resources at the Utah BLM. Actually, I wish I could be on the other side of the screen and see how we got all of that to fit on the screen. And Commissioner Mike McKee, Commissioner from Uintah County. Thanks for sticking around for this additional broadcast. Let's pick up where we left off in the half-hour broadcast about the litigation and the impact. Is it frustrating to a federal agency when environmental organizations inject themselves in management planning via litigation? Is that the right way to approach this or not? And actually, any of you can answer from your perspective on this.
Well, it has a lot of different effects. We don't essentially like litigation because it eats up our time, it eats up our resources. It doesn't enable us to get projects done on the ground. In this case, for example, improvement of sage-grouse habitat. So it really restricts our ability to move forward.
John?
Well, we second that. We work closely with the BLM on a lot of issues because the state school trust lands are generally mixed in with BLM land. And so we see the frustration that our counterparts at BLM have when they're forced to spend so much time and so many resources on litigation that it makes actual on-the-ground progress on a lot of things very, very difficult to achieve.
Does it also have the effect of, once attention's drawn to it and litigation is in process, of tying your hands on some of the flexibility of how you might otherwise successfully manage a project like this?
Well, the real tying of the hands will be if there is a listing of the species as threatened in 2015. That's when the Fish and Wildlife Service will tie the hands of BLM, state and private alike. So that's why people are working together to avoid that listing.
When we were in our green room conversation before we started taping the show, Mike, you were talking about the need for real flexibility in this. Would you like to comment on that a little bit more?
You know, sometimes when management decisions come out, and this isn't a criticism, but sometimes as management comes out, there'll be nice, neat circles that'll be drawn that'll be, 2 miles, 4 miles. We've always taken the position that we should have adaptive management. For example, you may have a cliff, and maybe down here you've got another a layer that is fields and that kind of thing, and that nice, neat circle, this area down here may have no effect with what's up on the upper ridge, and so excuse me, we believe that adaptive management is really a much better way to look at this. And there's so many other factors that can go into those kind of decisions when you really look at adaptive management, not just hard line circles and criteria that gets built in that doesn't necessarily fit or make sense.
So you're saying when those topographical lines get closer together, that has no impact on the circle that's being drawn?
There's many times that could very much be the case, yeah.
Well, BLM recognizes that too. We know if we draw a circle, that gives us an area, some type of designated area to work within. But we also know, for wildlife habitat, for example, that every single acre within that area may not be what we're trying to protect. And if we have cliff lines, visibility, opportunities to manage and have activities within that, then we try to do that. We're probably not do it as well as we could because of some of the restrictions we have, but we do recognize adaptive management, and it's part of our dialogue and a part of the way we try to do business.
And that's what the state working group is trying to come up with, is the sort of flexibility in management that recognizes that on-the-ground conditions vary. So that's part of what the state is trying to address.
Part of the discussion that keeps coming up in several of the communities that deal with public land management is this kind of, for better terms, dynamic concept of land management that says, okay, for the current time, we need this much area for protection, but there may become a higher use for that land that may impact that, say, 5 years or 10 years down the road. You know, like if there were a mineralogical discovery under that land that hadn't been there before. And so the idea is that you prepare an additional, or you find other acres and actually prepare that habitat and then shift it so that you always have a certain percentage that's involved in this habitat protection, but the actual acres change from time to time. Is that a concept that's on the table with you guys at all in this discussion?
Excuse me, part of our county plan is off-site mitigation, which accomplishes that very item. Sometimes there are conditions where it makes a lot of sense, where you do off-site mitigation, where maybe you have a particular area that's being impacted and there's another area that could be treated, that, you know, you could have a very nice area that could help accomplish the goals that we're looking at, but it's off-site, it may be in an alternate location.
And we have to be sure that that's going to work. You know, within BLM, offsite mitigation is part of what we look at. There's certain species, and sage grouse is one of those. Offsite mitigation may work, but it may not be the best answer. So we need to be able to evaluate, is this conservation or flexibility, is it going to work here or not? And we go through an assessment process to make that determination.
Does sometimes the process of making all the analysis just slow the project down to a point where everybody just feels like they're caught in a time warp somewhere, or it's Groundhog Day and Bill Murray's starting the day all over again?
I think sometimes, and remember, sage grouse is only one issue, and there are so many others involving the public lands that, I mean, we're focusing on sage grouse, but you have wilderness issues and other species and water issues and so on. So it's always complicated.
If I could build on it, there's all these other issues, but just within the Endangered Species Act, there are an additional 500 species that U.S. Fish and Wildlife is looking to have listed. I'm told that there's about $200 million that's been set apart to do that. Look at the time and the effort and everything that we're putting into just this issue with the sage grouse. There are legitimate species that needs to be looked at, but there are also certain groups that want to use the Endangered Species Act to accomplish certain goals that they have, and you know, we've got to be honest about that.
Mm-hmm. Immediately what comes to mind is the snail darter joke, but that goes back to the Carter administration a long time ago. So, and I'm not even sure what a snail darter is. I don't know if it's a snail or a fish. So, open comments on that?
You know, there are certain entities that use the Endangered Species Act and other laws and regulations that we've got to accomplish their objectives and their purposes. They don't always agree with what BLM or other land management agencies do, but it's a process that has enabled them to set land aside for wilderness or that sort of thing. But it's part of the process, and unfortunately we have to deal with that, and it does give everybody the opportunity to be involved.
And I think that we would second Commissioner McKee's thought that at some point with the sage grouse particularly, where you have a single species that is a huge part of the entire landmass of the Intermountain West. I'm not sure what, but it would certainly be a third of the area, a fourth of the area of the entire Intermountain West that is affected by it. I don't know that the Endangered Species Act actually was ever meant to control a landscape that large over many, many years. And there is a lot of room for improvement in the Act to make it more flexible.
So this really, as the phrase was coined, and somebody just mentioned it to me in the last 24 hours, that, and I thought it was very apropos, that this potentially could be the spotted owl of the western United States. It's
probably bigger,
yeah.
Probably more so.
I see that it's got everybody taking it very serious. Any last comments from any of you on this extended version?
Reform.
You know, one thing that we kind of referred to, and that anytime we're dealing with biological resources, such as sage grouse in this case, we need to make sure we're using the best science available. We know that our science knowledge changes over time, but that's what's going to enable us to be successful, to understand what the requirements and habitat requirements of a species are, and then best be able to manage our resources so that we can do what is best for the species and still be able to allow for other resource uses concurrently.
Somewhere in the back of my mind was this thought that if you, with the proper management and the proper habitat, you could actually have fewer acres dedicated and have a burgeoning population and still allow for these other species and all these other things to take place if you can get really active and good science management on the ground. Am I only dreaming and thinking? Am I only dreaming and thinking that, or is that
from my point of view? You could do that if this was all if all this was about was bird numbers, but I believe there's other objectives in mind here as well. I do believe a lot of this does have to do with, you know, when you're looking at the habitat and with a wide brush, painting as many acres as possible to have them off the table for any other type of use. Much like a wilderness designation.
Any other comments on that before we wrap this up? All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate taking the extra time to join us here on the county seat. And of course, always I remind you that who are watching on the web for this extended broadcast can tune in the show every Sunday morning, 8 a.m. on ABC4. Thanks for joining us.